Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Autumn and today I want to share 7 lessons that I have learned the hard way as a writer. So a lot of these tips and these lessons I'm going to share with you guys have been things that I have learned over my 3.5 years of writing. They're all personal experiences, mistakes that I've made myself, and going back and reviewing my work and reviewing my writing and knowing that my writing is not perfect and knowing that I have to go back and critique my own writing and figure out what I'm weak at and what to work on. I wanted to come here and talk about that mainly because if you are experiencing these things yourself, you are not alone. I'm sure I'm not the only one that has experienced these 7 things that I'm going to talk about, but let me know if you resonate with any of these little hard lessons that I have learned over the 3.5 years of my writing, and let me know if you have any other lessons that you want to caution other writers about. But let's go ahead and just jump into these 7 hard lessons that I've learned as a writer. They're going to be in no particular order. I just wrote them all down in the order that they popped up into my head. So the first thing I want to talk about is outline and get all of your ideas down. Before you click off of the video, before you skip to the next one, let me explain myself. You don't have to be a die-hard plotter or a little bit of a plantser to do this. You can still do this as a pantser. What I mean by this and why I feel like this works, at least for me. When I first started writing and I got back into the craft, you have all that buildup, all that sludge from either years and years of not writing, weeks of not writing, or maybe you have so many ideas you just don't know where to start. Just write it all out. Write down every single idea that you have. It doesn't have to be super detailed information. You can literally have a plot point that says, and she gets away from the enemy. You know, something super small, or I want a romance subplot. Something small, but get those ideas out. And the reason I say this is because from personal experience, I would hang on to ideas in my mind and not write them out. I would get stuck on thinking about, okay, I really want this part in the story. I really want this. I really want this. And I'd sit here and that's the only idea I would ever think about. I wouldn't think of, well, how can I connect this one idea to this idea, or what comes after this idea? Because I was so fixed on having this one idea that I didn't write it down to let my mind continue to explore what can potentially happen or where that point could potentially lead, or is it a dead end that could lead me somewhere else? I learned this kind of the hard way when I wrote my first novel. That was actually, I ended up shelving it and restarted the story when I first started writing this one project, and I had all of these ideas, but I felt like I didn't let myself explore other potential ideas, and I wanted to just strictly stick to those ideas, and it really hurt and really created a difficult writing experience. As I said, I ended up having to shelve that project, and then when I started over, I went through and I did everything that I had said. I wrote down all the potential ideas I had, anything that I felt like fit into that story, or just any random idea. And then I started building the story off of that after I reevaluated all of the information that I had, all of my potential world building or character or plot or setting ideas, any of that stuff. Once I wrote it all down, I got a good solid picture of what I wanted the story to be. And I was like, okay, we got the sludge, we got that nonsense out of the way, but now let's come back and reevaluate the story. I just want to say that you could still be a pantser, absolutely, 1010%, absolutely. Just my advice would be to quickly write down, jot down those ideas, bullet point those ideas, so you can allow yourself to continue to be creative and come up with really fun and creative and fresh ideas. The next one I want to talk about is finish that draft. If you finish a project, you write beginning, middle, and end. If you write the entire story, you will learn more doing that versus only ever writing the first 20,000 or only ever writing the first 5,000 words. Push through. It's going to be garbage. It's going to be rough, but finish it. If you haven't written in a really long time and you want to get back into writing that first novel, not if you've been writing for 5 or 6 years, you've got a couple of stories under your belt and you kind of understand your writing process, and maybe you are a writer where you have to write the first act or the first 10,000 words a few times to figure out where you want the story to go. This one isn't necessarily for you. This is more for somebody who doesn't really know, or they've never completed a story because they've only ever been stuck in that first act or the first half of the story. This is more directed towards those individuals, which was me at one point 3.5 years ago. My biggest suggestion is, if you've never completed a story and you've really wanted to, maybe you have started multiple stories over 10 years and you can just never get past this one part in the story. What I would suggest is to push past it, or have that part that you feel like you always get stuck at, have that be the first chapter, then continue to write the story. So then you go ahead and you get that slump out of the way, that rut, whatever that giant hill, whatever treacherous stump that you can't get past with your story, have that be the first 2,000 words, or don't even write that part at all and just keep going. But I promise you will learn so much more about your craft if you actually finish the story. I personally have learned so much from actually writing a complete first draft. So I have 3 completed first drafts. So they still suck and they're still really rough around the edges. But I completed these stories. Whether this is a whole cohesive story, whether it makes sense, that's a whole other beast that I'll get to eventually. But the story's finished. I have that beginning, I have that middle, and I have that ending. So I have stuff to go off of. Who knows, I might really love the ending and I have to scrap everything and write the whole beginning and middle over again, or whatever the case may be. But I have a completed draft to work off of, and that is huge. So personally, I would just say, even if you feel like you're stuck with a story, you don't know where to go, and it's your first time ever trying to write a novel. I'm saying a novel, which is about 50,000 words or more. That's a lot. It can be very intimidating. I promise, just take a breath, just keep writing, keep pushing through, and get that first draft written, because you will have so much more to build off of if you have that first draft completed. I promise. And I am somebody who, before I joined AuthorTube and really started to take my writing a lot more seriously, I was somebody who never finished a first draft. I would always start, get stuck, didn't know where to go, ran out of ideas. That's a whole thing. You're a writer. You're not gonna run out of ideas. You just ran out of the inspiration to keep those ideas going. So you just have to find what's gonna inspire you to keep the story going. But I used to be that writer who would always write the first half, the first whatever, and never finish a complete story. But by golly, I finally ended up doing it. And finishing that first draft, the taste of victory. There's no sweeter taste than victory. So this third point, I don't know if a lot of people would agree with me on this, but this works for me, and I have encouraged myself to do this since I've discovered that my writing doesn't work without it. The third hard lesson I learned is have an idea of what you want the ending to be. Not everyone will agree with me on that, and that's totally fine, because these are things that have improved my writing. These are lessons that I've learned that work for me. That's not gonna work for everybody, but I have to have an idea of where I want the story to end. Once I find that out, I can work backwards. So if I know how I want the story to start, it's all beautiful, vivid, painted scenes, and I know what I want the middle to be, but then I'm like, what's the ending? I don't even know. We're gonna stop. We're gonna come up with a few ideas of how we want the ending to go. Reevaluate those other vivid scenes and all the really cool, fun, magic-y type stuff that's gonna happen in the middle. Figure out how that's gonna fit towards the ending. Not everyone will agree with me on that, and that's totally fine. And honestly, before I realized that it was an issue, I thought that that was kind of strange to know what you wanted the ending to be. Because when I wrote my first story, I had no idea what the ending was. And as I was writing the story, I was realizing that I didn't know what the ending was. I stopped maybe about 60 to 70% through that story, and then I outlined 3 potential endings. And then as I got closer, I picked which one I thought would be the best for that story. And that was how I was slowly starting to discover that if I don't have an ending or a direction that I want the story to go, I am going to confuse myself. I'm going to feel a little run down and burnt out. And that was how I felt with, I believe it was either my second project, which is Project Burning Roses, or it was Project Ice. It was one of those 2 projects, and I can't remember which one. It could have been both, honestly. That I really struggled to get to the ending and finalize what I wanted that ending to be. With the story I'm currently drafting, which is Project Traveling Bards, I know what the ending is. I 110% know where I want that story to go. Now it might change. I might write the entire first draft, realize maybe that's not the best ending for the story, and then when I'm editing and trying to come up, with a second draft and third draft and all of that stuff, and then it can change, then that's fine. But right now, I know exactly how I want this first draft to go. I know exactly how I want this first draft to end. If I'm stuck anywhere throughout the rest of the story, I at least know, okay, well, what can my characters do in order to get to this ending? And there we go. That's it. To me, it's genius. Again, that's not gonna work for everybody. So if you've never tried that before, or if you feel like you keep getting stuck with your stories, start with your ending and then work backwards. Number 4, this was one I had to learn very, very quickly in order for me to finish my first draft. Do not edit as you go. That might work for some, again, like the other one and probably like any of the other hard lessons that I've learned as a writer. It's gonna be different for everyone, but don't edit as you go. Write it, get it out, throw whatever's in your mind down on the paper, because you will have plenty of time to edit that draft later, to edit those words. And you're gonna do it in stages too. So just write it, get it all out. I will sometimes reread some of my drafts or some of my chapters to realize when I sit down for a writing session to see where I want this next little bit, this next writing session to go. I have seen some ridiculous spelling, some ridiculous words, and trying to figure out like, what exactly did I mean? But I don't go in, I don't fix it. I don't edit it. You're drafting at this point. And I think that's something that when I was a first-time writer trying to get through my first draft, I didn't realize I needed to separate my two brains, basically. I'm right here and I'm drafting, and then when I get to edits, I can worry about edits. It's kind of like when you are outlining a story or just trying to get some of your ideas out, you're using different muscles. I don't know if you technically are, but outlining a story and drafting a story and editing a story, those are all different things. Your mind is thinking about different things as you're doing any of those steps in the writing process. I would say that when you're drafting, just draft. Don't worry about editing. You're going to mess up things. You're going to write horrendous words, stuff that's not going to make sense, things that are going to be cut immediately, and that is totally fine. Just write it, get it out of your system, keep it there. It's fine. You'll fix it later. I say this as a lesson, but I feel like this one is kind of more of a tip. Or something that I have learned to do in my whole writing process over the years. I will leave myself notes within the text. I would definitely recommend doing this. I know if you are somebody who is a plotter or a planner, you might have Google Documents or like a journal or anything that you keep any of your jotted ideas on. Sometimes people keep them on their phone. But sometimes when I'm in the middle of drafting and I am inside the draft, and let's just say I'm writing a scene and the scene isn't going the way I want it to, or I come up with another idea, I will either stop what I'm doing, write myself a note and say, this scene's not working. I'll come back to it later to finish it, or I'll say that this isn't working, just disregard. I'll drop down a couple of lines and then I'll either rewrite the scene or leave myself little bullet points, be like, well, this was what I wanted in the scene. This was the conversations I wanted the characters to have. Who do I want in the scene and what's the outcome? And then I move forward. If I got that new idea where I'm like, ooh, I think this would fit the scene better, I'll write that scene instead. See where that goes. And I have used all 3 of these throughout writing my last 2 projects. There are so many little parts in Project Traveling Bards that do have, this isn't working, just disregard this, or this doesn't work, I'm an idiot, I don't know what I'm trying to say. And then I drop down a little bit and then I repeat. If I can find where those are in that document, I'll show some screenshots because it's quite funny. All right, so the sixth lesson I want to talk about today is more on an actual craft level. I would say understand your main character, your plot, and what you want the story to achieve. What is the whole point of this story? Those are the things I would also start with. So yeah, I was talking about finishing drafts. I was talking about writing out all your ideas. Just keep writing the draft. If it's garbage, it's okay. Everybody's first draft is garbage. But this one, I really think that these are important. While the other 5 are very important, you can't write a story if you don't know your main character, or if you don't have a plot, or if you don't have an idea of the theme of the story. You know, what are you trying to tell? I would really recommend to sit down, jot down some notes about your main character, the plot, and why are they going on this adventure? What are they trying to prove? Or what is your whole point to telling this story? And a lot of the times you might not know if you're just starting to brainstorm an idea. It might be something that as you write the story, you discover that as you write the story, and that's fine too. But I do think you need to at least understand who your main character is or what you want the story to be about. That is what I would suggest. Do a little bit of research on who your main character is going to be, a little bit of notes to jot some stuff down about them. And when I mean like jot down some notes, I really don't mean hair color, eye color, how tall are they, what kind of flavor ice cream do they like. I mean things that are going to matter to the story. Now if those are things that matter to the story, then of course include them. But I mean, what's the character's motive? What are things that they really want and can't have? And what's the reason why they can't have them? Those are the types of questions I think you should answer before you just dive into a story. But that's just personal. Those are the things that I had to learn the hard way. I've tried to write stories without really knowing my main character, and I felt like my story and my character just had no direction. I just felt like they got shot out into space and were just floating around with nowhere to go. So that's why I would encourage you to at least understand some of those key motives, some of those key parts to your main character. And on the screen, I'll talk about some of the things that I include before I ever start writing a first draft that I have learned over the years, and things that I've learned that really make my first drafts stronger and make for a more fun writing experience because I already know these characters. I'm gonna learn more about them as I continue to edit the story, but it's good to be acquaintances before you get into that first draft with that character, at least in my opinion, from my experience. And that goes the same with the plot. I like to think of the 3 Ps, which Brandon Sanderson talks about in his writing lectures. And the 3 Ps are your promise, your progress, and your payoff. These are quick things that I think about when I am coming up with a story. So let's just say we answer those questions about the main character and then thinking about the 3 Ps. So the promise is, what are you promising the reader? What is the story gonna be? What is the story promising? Your progress is going to be, how does the story progress to get to your payoff? And the payoff goes back to the promise of the story. I will leave Brandon Sanderson's writing lectures linked down below if you're curious about them. If you want that more in depth, highly recommend. And the final tip or lesson that I would like to share today is really for me, because I used to do this and get myself into such a bind. This one is, do not spend a lot of time world building and developing that magic system, because it's gonna change. While it's good to have an idea of the world and the setting and, you know, all the fun little magic parts in the story, well, all that is great, and I love creating that stuff. That's great, phenomenal. We all do, I think. It's gonna change. A lot of the times it's going to change. While those are important elements to the story, your characters and your plot should be a lot more important. You should really understand that stuff, because then you can manipulate your surroundings or manipulate your magic system to get to the story that you want it to be. So if you have a super hard magic system and you don't know your characters, or if you don't have an idea of your plot, I promise it's gonna get stuck. I got stuck trying to create a really beautiful, fun, fun world, unique world, and spend a lot of time building a magic system that didn't fit the characters and didn't fit the story I was trying to tell. And I'll give an example. In my project Burning Roses, this takes place kind of around this magical swamp that has a lot of magical elements to it. But for some reason, I thought it would be fun if my characters had magical weapons. And to me, that doesn't quite fit the story, because they were all wielding types of metal. It wasn't like they had bows and arrows that were from this magical swamp that they could use. I mean, they might now, because once I realized that the magic system in the world didn't match, I was trying to come up with some solutions to a magic system that fits within the world. But my point is, when I first started writing this one project, I'd spent a lot of time on this magic system, trying to create some rules and limits and all of that magic system stuff. And then I was creating a world, and never once did I think, well, they don't make sense together. And then I just now have characters wielding magical metal swords in a world where you have like an enchanted swamp. They didn't make sense. My suggestion would be to have a little bit of an understanding if you want magic in your world, or have a little bit of an idea of some of the world building, but don't go wild and crazy. And that was what I had to learn the very, very hard way. So with my new project that I'm writing, I have a little bit of the world, some names of places and their significance to the story, and a little bit of the magic and who can do magic and what all counts as magic and little things like that. But other than that, I'm letting my first draft kind of tell me what the magic system should be. Like, does it make sense? Does it fit the story? And to me, it feels like it fits the story a lot better versus the example that I just gave. And of course, that's not gonna fit everybody. That's not gonna fit everybody's situation. I mean, if you don't write fantasy, which is what this tip was mainly for my fantasy writers, my beginner fantasy writers out there. If you don't really write fantasy or have anything with like fantastical elements in it, I guess that doesn't really apply to you, but the world building might. So this next portion I want to talk about are going to be all the resources that I feel like made a difference in my own writing. Some of these are going to be books, some of these are going to be writing lectures. So the books I want to talk about, which I personally would suggest reading them together. So the first one is Save the Cat Writes a Novel, and this one is the one by Jessica Brody for novel reading, and then the other one is Story Genius by Lisa Cron. I do believe this author, Jessica Brody, has a YouTube channel where she goes into depth about this, I believe. Also, Lizelle Samberry broke this down as well, so I'll leave all of those links down in the description if you want to check out anything for this, but I would recommend this and this as well. The next one I want to recommend, I talked about his lectures just maybe about 5 or 10 minutes ago, but I would recommend Brandon Sanderson's writing lectures. He has, I think, 13 lectures of him sitting down and talking about creative writing for free online. They're on his YouTube channel. So I'm gonna leave the link to his channel down below because those were absolutely phenomenal and changing to my writing. I went from, I tried to write a story, it's not working, I'm really confused, I just need somebody with some experience break down the craft and all the parts of story structure and just the whole writing craft in general. I just need somebody to sit down and talk about it. And Brandon Sanderson's writing lectures are a great way to go. And they're free online. A few more videos I want to mention is Catatastic. She has a YouTube channel where she breaks down this other way of story structure, basically. So it's called the 3-act, 9-block, 27-chapter structure outline. It is a perfect beginner's outline to writing your first draft. Now it has flaws. I mean, it's just one person's opinion. It's just their one way of writing a story, absolutely. And you have to find what works best for you and your writing style and what works with your brain. I get it. I totally get it. But the 3-act, 9-block, 27-chapter story structure, that got me to complete my first draft. That story structure right there saved it. And it is brilliant to start with. And I do think that there is a link online that breaks down that the whole structure of everything too. Any links I find will be down below, I promise. I do have 2 more physical books that I will mention, as well as another one that I don't personally, 2 more that I don't personally own. I haven't read these or the other 2 that I don't have purchased. These are the ones that I've seen other people talk about that I do trust, but since I haven't looked at them myself, I am a little weary of recommending them, but I want to give as many resources as I possibly can. So here we go. So this one is Stephen King, A Memoir on the Craft on Writing. Now I did read a little bit of this. I think I got about halfway or maybe like a third through, and I just never finished it. It's just sometimes Stephen King's writing can be a little hard for me to read, but what I read of it was really beneficial. I feel like it's great to see where he came from and what he was before success. I would recommend it for sure. The little bit that I read, I did enjoy, I just hadn't finished it. Now I haven't read this one, but I have seen, I believe it was Kelly Ty that talked about this a while ago on her channel. But this is Zen and the Art of Writing, and this is by Ray Bradbury. I haven't read it, so I'm not sure, but that's another recommendation. And then the 2 I don't own, I'm gonna have to put on the screen because I don't exactly remember what the exact names of them were, but They're these two books. I know one is Anatomy of Storytelling. Lindsay Puckett, I know, uses this, and she has, I think, a couple of videos on her channel where she breaks down talking about this. She talks about the certain chapters and the certain things that were beneficial to her writing. So I'm gonna leave her channel link down below and those videos if you're interested in seeing that. That is one that I do want to read. And then the last one I want to talk about is, it's a thesaurus. I know Sarah Sutton used to use this when she was first starting to get into writing and when she was going through edits and she was trying to not use repetitive words. Now I would use caution with this one because I think this is one that would be more likely to be used like editing or working on not your first draft. Just use caution with that one. I wouldn't personally worry too much about it if you're writing a first draft, unless you're just trying to expand your first draft, but I wouldn't focus too much on it if you're writing your first draft. But I did want to mention it. The other resource or resources really that I would recommend is honestly reading books that are inside your genre, that are outside your genre, books that you don't think you're gonna like, books that you absolutely love, authors you've never read before, authors you've read before. Do it all. Read anything you can get your grubby little hands on, because you are going to learn more about the writing craft, writing style, what you like, what you don't like, what you want to read, what you want to write, what you don't want to write. You will learn so much if you just sit down and read, or I say with a physical book, that was what that meant, or if you just listen to an audiobook. You will learn so much just by reading. I have seen some interesting things that go around that sometimes authors or writers, they don't read or they don't read inside their genre. While I understand maybe if as you're writing a story, you don't want to read inside that same genre, but you should dip your toes into it to understand how a story like that works, if that makes any sense. But I do think you should do a little bit of research, do a little bit of homework. I think that is a really strong way of building your writing craft. Personally, I feel like I have learned so much about writing just from reading books and seeing how certain authors maybe get to certain outcomes. Just reading a book, and then it makes you look at things with a more critical eye sometimes, and I feel like that really improves my own craft. I'm gonna leave you with those resources, but those are the things that I definitely recommend. That is everything I have for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you got something out of it. I hope that you were able to connect with anything that I mentioned here. If you did, definitely let me know. And if there's anything that you want to add, if you have your own experiences that you want to talk about, leave it all down in the comments below. That is everything I have for you today. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.